Hey guys, before the video starts, I want to say that I added a join button where you can become member of Mr. Prodanov's family. And also, to all those who are new, feel free to subscribe. It can help a lot. Okay, so I'm not sure where to even start with this, but I guess I need to get it out there. This is going to sound completely insane, but I swear to you, it's real. If you've ever been curious about the dark web, let this be your warning. So about a month ago, I was in a really dark place. My job sucked, my girlfriend had just left me, and my life felt like it was falling apart. I was drinking way too much and spending way too much time online. I don't even remember how I first found out about it. Probably some forum or another, but I stumbled upon this dark website that offered a service to swap lives with someone else. Yeah, I know how it sounds, but at the time I was desperate enough to believe it could work. The site was super sketchy. It had this old school text-only interface that looked like it was straight out of the 90s, and everything was written in this weird broken English. But the testimonials, they were what got me. People swore up and down that this thing worked, that they had actually switched lives with someone else and escaped their shitty existence. I won't get into the specifics of how I accessed the dark web. If you don't know, you're better off that way. But after some digging, I found the site again. It was called Life Exchange, and it promised a complete life swap with someone else for just $500. Looking back, I should have known it was too good to be true. But like I said, I was desperate. So I transferred the money using Bitcoin, and almost immediately I got an email with a link to a downloadable kit. The instructions were strange. There was this long, rambling explanation about aligning your soul frequencies with the person you wanted to swap with. It required a few personal items: hair, a piece of clothing, something with your scent. Typical voodoo type shit. The weirdest part was the person I was supposed to swap with. His profile just popped up on the screen. After I submitted my payment, his name was Ivan. No last name, no location, just Ivan. There was a picture of him though. He looked like he was in his late 30s, balding, with these cold, dead eyes that seemed to stare right through the screen. I gathered the items and followed the instructions to the letter. The final step involved lying down in a dark room, holding the items, and repeating this weird chant from the PDF. It was in some language I didn't recognize, maybe Latin, but I did it anyway. That night, I had the most vivid, fucked up dream of my life. I was in this decrepit, rotting house, the air thick with the decay. The walls were covered in these bizarre, almost organic-looking patterns, like veins or roots, and there was a figure standing in the corner, half shrouded in darkness. Ivan. He was smiling at me, this twisted, unnatural grin that made my skin crawl. When I woke up, everything was different. I was in a different bed, in a different room. It took me a few moments to process what had happened, but when I did, I almost threw up. I was in Ivan's body. His life was a fucking nightmare. The house I was in was the same one from my dream, old, rotting, and filled with this awful stench. There was no electricity, no running water, nothing. It was like stepping back in time 100 years. And the worst part, I wasn't alone. There were other things in the house. I hesitate to call them people because they didn't act human. They moved in these jerky, unnatural ways, like puppets with their strings cut. Their eyes were empty, soulless, and they whispered to themselves constantly. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but it sounded like the same chant I had recited. I tried to leave, but every time I reached the front door, I found myself back in that same room, staring at Ivan's grinning face. It was like the house was alive, trapping me in its decaying bowels. I found Ivan's journal, and what I read there made my blood run cold. He had been part of some kind of cult, worshipping an entity they called the Shadow. They believed that by performing these life-swapping rituals, they could gain immortality, transferring their consciousness into younger bodies indefinitely. But the price was their humanity. They became twisted, empty husks, like the ones I saw in the house. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, weeks. Time doesn't seem to work the same way in this place. I've tried everything to escape, but it's no use. The house won't let me go, and the others, they're always watching, always whispering. If you're reading this, please, stay away from the dark web. No matter how bad things get, it's not worth it. I'm trapped here in a living nightmare, and I don't think I'll ever get out. I've got to keep writing this down, partly to keep my sanity, and partly because I need someone to know what happened if I don't make it out. The more time I spend in this house, the worse things get. I've stopped trying to count the days. Time is meaningless here, and I can't even tell if it's day or night anymore. So after I realized there was no escaping, I decided to explore the house. Big mistake. The place is a labyrinth, rooms shifting and changing whenever you're not looking. 1 second, I'd be in what looked like an old kitchen, and the next, it'd be a child's bedroom, covered in dust and cobwebs. I started hearing things too, not just the whispers from the others, but sounds coming from the walls, scratching, like something trying to get out. At night, if you can call it that, I'd hear soft, wet footsteps outside my door, stopping just short of entering. The air in the house feels heavy, oppressive, like it's pressing down on me. Breathing is difficult, like I'm inhaling thick, rancid smoke. One day, I stumbled into a room that seemed different from the others. It was an old study, lined with shelves full of ancient leather-bound books. On the desk, I found another journal, not Ivan's this time, but someone else's. The handwriting was spidery and difficult to read, but it was clear enough. This journal belonged to one of the previous victims. The entries were horrifying. They spoke of rituals, sacrifices, and the summoning of something they called the Shadow. The cult had been trying to bring this entity into our world, and the life-swapping was part of the process. Each swap brought them closer to their goal, but it also corrupted them, turning them into those hollow, whispering creatures I saw. The most disturbing part was a drawing, a crude sketch of the Shadow. It was a monstrous figure, all sharp angles and voids, with eyes like black holes that seemed to suck in the light around them. The journal mentioned that once the Shadow was fully in our world, it would consume everything, bending reality to its will. I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to destroy the journal, but the pages wouldn't burn. They just hissed and smoked, like they were made of something other than paper. I threw it into a corner and fled the room, my mind racing. Back in what had become my room, I started piecing things together. Ivan and his court were using these swaps to offer sacrifices to the Shadow, each new victim feeding its power, and now I was part of their twisted game. The others in the house started to change. Their whispers grew louder, more insistent. and their movements became more erratic. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of them out of the corner of my eye, jerking and twitching like marionettes. I think they were trying to tell me something, but their words were lost in the cacophony of voices. Then one night, or maybe it was day, I heard a new sound, a low, guttural growl coming from the basement. I had avoided the basement as long as I could, but now it was calling to me, drawing me in like a moth to a flame. I found the door, hidden behind a rotting tapestry. The stairs were steep and narrow, leading down into pitch darkness. As I descended, the air grew colder, the growling louder. I could barely see, but I kept going, my heart pounding in my chest. At the bottom, I found a room that looked like an ancient crypt. The walls were lined with decaying bones, and in the center was a stone altar, stained with something dark and sticky. And there, in the shadows, I saw it, the shadow. It was worse than I could have imagined, a mass of writhing darkness, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. It looked at me, and for a moment I felt my mind unraveling, like it was peeling back the layers of my sanity one by one. I stumbled back, my body trembling. The shadow reached out, tendrils of darkness snaking toward me. In a panic, I grabbed a bone from the wall and swung it wildly, the darkness retreating with a hiss. I ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was back in my room, slamming the door behind me. My mind was racing, my thoughts a jumbled mess. The shadow was real, and it was hungry. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. The house is getting worse, the walls closing in on me. The others are more aggressive, their whispers now sounding like threats, and I keep seeing Ivan's face, grinning at me from the shadows. If you're reading this, please stay away from the dark web. Don't make the same mistake I did. Once you're in, there's no way out. I'm trapped here, in this nightmare, and I don't think I'll ever wake up. I've got to keep going. Writing this down is the only thing keeping me from losing it completely. The house is changing more rapidly now, rooms morphing into different, more grotesque versions of themselves. The air feels like it's thickening, making it harder to move, harder to breathe. The whispers of the others have become a constant background noise, a sinister hum that never leaves me alone. A few nights ago, I think I found Yvonne's personal sanctum. I was wandering through the house, trying to find anything that could help me understand what was happening, and I stumbled into a hidden room behind a false wall. It was filled with strange artifacts, ancient-looking idols, jars filled with unidentifiable substances, and books. Lots of books. One of them caught my eye immediately. It was an old, leather-bound tome, its cover inscribed with strange symbols that seemed to pulse and writhe under my gaze. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The pages were filled with detailed instructions for dark rituals, summoning incantations, and worst of all, methods for binding souls. Ivan and his cult weren't just worshipping the shadow, they were enslaving themselves to it. The more I read, the clearer it became. The life-swapping wasn't just about escaping their lives, it was about offering sacrifices. Each swap was a soul offered up to the shadow, feeding its power and bringing it closer to breaking through fully into our world. My swap was just another link in the chain, another step toward their ultimate goal. I spent hours poring over the book, trying to find some way to reverse the ritual, to break the cycle. But the language was difficult, the instructions vague and contradictory. Every time I thought I had a grasp on something, it slipped away, like sand through my fingers. One passage stood out, though. It spoke of a ritual of severance, a way to break the bond between the sacrificed soul and the shadow. It required a few specific items: a mirror, a blade, and blood. Lots of blood. The thought of it made my stomach turn, but I knew I didn't have a choice. It was my only chance. I found an old, cracked mirror in one of the bedrooms and a rusted knife in the kitchen. The blood. That was going to be a problem. I didn't know if it had to be mine or if any blood would do, but I didn't have the luxury of being picky. I prepared everything in the room where I first woke up. I placed the mirror on the floor, propped up so I could see my reflection. The blade lay next to it, gleaming dully in the dim light. I took a deep breath and made a small cut on my palm, letting the blood drip onto the mirror. As soon as the first drop hit the glass, I felt a shift in the air, a tightening around my chest. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. The others knew what I was doing. I could hear them moving through the house, their footsteps echoing in the halls. I started the chant from the book, my voice shaking. The words felt foreign on my tongue, twisting and warping as they left my lips. The mirror began to glow, a sickly, unnatural light spreading from the bloodstains. The room grew colder, and I could see my breath in the air. The darkness in the corners deepened, and from it, figures began to emerge. The others, they looked more solid now, more human, but their eyes were still empty, their movements jerky and unnatural. They surrounded me, their whispers merging into a single, incomprehensible noise. I kept chanting, my voice rising in pitch and volume. The mirror's light grew brighter, almost blinding. I felt a tugging sensation in my chest, like something was being pulled out of me. Suddenly, the others lunged at me. Their hands were cold and clammy, their grip like iron. They were trying to stop me, to break the ritual. I struggled, kicking and screaming, but there were too many of them. Their whispers turned into shrieks, a cacophony of madness. Just when I thought it was over, the mirror shattered. The light exploded outward, knocking the others back. The tugging sensation intensified, and I felt myself being lifted, pulled toward the fragments of glass. And then, everything went black. I woke up on the floor, my body aching. The others were gone, the room silent. The pieces of the mirror lay around me, each shard reflecting a different part of my face. I could feel something had changed, something fundamental. The bond was broken, but the house was still the same. The walls still rotted, the air still thick with the decay. The whispers had stopped, but I could still feel the shadow's presence, lurking just out of sight. I don't know if the ritual worked completely, or if it's just a temporary reprieve. The book didn't say what would happen after the severance, only that it would break the immediate connection. I might have bought myself some time, but I'm still trapped here, in this twisted, living nightmare. I can't keep this up much longer. The house is wearing me down, breaking me piece by piece. I don't know if anyone will ever read this, but if you do, remember, stay away from the dark web. There are things out there, things beyond your worst nightmares, and once you're caught in their web, there's no escape. I'm going to keep trying to find a way out. Maybe there's something I missed in the book, some clue I overlooked, but I'm not hopeful. The shadow is still here, still watching, waiting for its next victim, and I'm afraid it won't have to wait much longer. This is going to be my final entry. I've come to terms with that. If I don't make it out, at least there will be a record, Something for someone to find, to know what happened here. I can feel the house closing in on me, the darkness becoming more oppressive, the shadows growing stronger, and I'm running out of time. After the ritual, things seemed to calm down for a while. The whispers were gone, and the others had retreated into the shadows. I thought maybe, just maybe, I had broken the cycle, but it didn't take long for me to realize how wrong I was. The house has been toying with me, playing with my mind. Rooms change even more frequently now, sometimes shifting right before my eyes. I'll open a door expecting the hallway, and instead, I'm faced with a twisted, hellish version of a place I once knew. My childhood bedroom, decayed and rotten, filled with broken toys and shadows that whisper my name. My old office, now a nightmarish labyrinth of cubicles and flickering lights, the walls closing in on me as I try to find an exit. The worst is the basement. I can hear that growling again, louder now, more insistent. It calls to me, a deep, resonant sound that vibrates through my bones. I know the shadow is down there, waiting for me. I've been avoiding it, but I can't any longer. Yesterday, I found a note that hadn't been there before. It was written in my handwriting, but I have no memory of writing it. It said, "It's time. Face it or become one of them." I don't know what it means exactly, but I understand the implication. If I don't confront the shadow, I'll end up like the others, a hollow, whispering husk. I spent hours preparing myself, going over the book again and again, looking for anything I might have missed. There was a section about facing your fears, about how the shadow feeds on them, grows stronger from them. It said that confronting the shadow head-on was the only way to weaken it, but it was vague on the details, as if the author wasn't entirely sure themselves. So here I am, standing at the top of the basement stairs, the growling echoing up from the darkness below. I've got a flashlight in one hand and the rusted knife in the other. My heart is pounding, my palms sweaty, but I can't turn back now. I take the first step, then another. The air grows colder with each step, the growling louder. I reach the bottom, the flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness. The crypt is there, just as I remember it, but the stone altar is different now. It's covered in fresh blood, the dark stain still wet and glistening. And there, in the center of the room, is the shadow. It's even larger now, a towering mass of darkness, its eyes gleaming with hunger. It sees me, and I feel that same mind-numbing terror wash over me, but I force myself to keep moving, to confront it. I step forward, holding the knife out in front of me. The shadow's growling intensifies, and it reaches out with its tendrils of darkness. They wrap around my ankles, pulling me closer. I swing the knife wildly, cutting through the tendrils, but more take their place. I remember the words from the book, the chant of severance. I start reciting it, my voice trembling, but growing stronger with each word. The shadow recoils, its growling turning into a deafening roar. The air around me crackles with energy, and I feel the ground shake beneath my feet. The shadow lashes out, its tendrils wrapping around my body, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I keep chanting, fighting through the pain, through the terror. The knife slips from my hand, clattering to the floor, but I don't stop. The words pour from my mouth, a desperate plea for freedom. The shadow's roar becomes a scream, a high-pitched, bone-chilling sound that makes my ears bleed. The darkness around me thickens, threatening to swallow me whole, but I keep chanting. I focus on the light, on the small glimmering hope that I can still escape this nightmare. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stops. The darkness recedes, the tendrils releasing me. The shadow lets out one final agonized scream before it collapses in on itself, imploding into a singular point of darkness before vanishing completely. I collapse to the floor, gasping for air. The room is silent now, the oppressive weight lifted. I can feel the house changing around me, the walls stabilizing, the air clearing. I don't know if it's over, if I've truly defeated the shadow, but for the first time in what feels like an eternity, I feel hope. I make my way back upstairs, my legs shaking, my body weak. The house looks different now, less menacing, more like an old abandoned building than a living nightmare. The others are gone, their whispers silenced. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if the shadow is truly gone or if it's just lying dormant, waiting for another victim. But for now, I'm free. If you're reading this, please take my story as a warning. Stay away from the dark web. No matter how desperate you are, no matter how tempting the offer, it's not worth it. There are things out there, things beyond your understanding, that can destroy you. I've seen them, I've faced them, and I barely survived. I'm going to leave this house to try and rebuild my life, but I'll never forget what happened here, and neither should you. Stay safe, stay away from the dark web, and never ever trust a deal that seems too good to be true. I bought a dark web potion that lets me read minds. I've always been fascinated by the unknown. Growing up, I was the kid who stayed up late reading horror stories and watching every scary movie I could get my hands on. But as I got older, the thrill began to wear off. I needed something more real, more intense. That's when I found the dark web. If you're not familiar with it, the dark web is a hidden part of the internet where anything and everything is for sale. Drugs, weapons, stolen identities, and, as I soon discovered, things much stranger and more disturbing. One night, while browsing through some forums, I stumbled upon a thread about a seller who claimed to have supernatural items. It sounded like complete bullshit, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on the link and was taken to a crude website with a list of bizarre items, cursed objects, haunted dolls, and, most intriguing of all, a potion that supposedly let you read minds. It was called the Elixir of Thought, and the description promised that a single drop would allow the user to hear the thoughts of anyone nearby. The price was steep, $500 for a small vial, but I was hooked. I had to know if it was real. So, in a moment of reckless excitement, I bought it. The package arrived a week later in a plain brown box with no return address. Inside was a small glass vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid. It looked like motor oil and smelled even worse, but I didn't care. I was too excited to finally try it out. I decided to test it at work. I'm a software developer at a mid-sized tech company, and my office is full of people, perfect for seeing if the potion actually worked. I waited until lunchtime when most of my coworkers were away, then slipped into the bathroom with the vial. My heart was pounding as I uncorked it and carefully measured out a single drop. It tasted like burnt rubber and made me gag, but I swallowed it down and waited. At first, nothing happened. I felt stupid for wasting my money on what was obviously a scam. But then, slowly, I started to hear whispers. They were faint at first, like a radio tuned to a distant station. But as the minutes passed, The voices grew clearer. I could hear snippets of conversations from the people in the office, complaints about work, weekend plans, petty gossip. It was incredible. The potion actually worked. For the next few days, I experimented with my new ability, listening in on the thoughts of everyone around me. It was thrilling, like having a superpower. But then things started to get weird. I began to hear thoughts that didn't make sense. Violent, disturbing thoughts that seemed completely out of character for the people I knew. I heard my mild-mannered boss fantasizing about stabbing his wife. I heard a coworker planning to set the building on fire. At first, I thought it was just the potion messing with my head. But the more I listened, the more I realized these were real, unfiltered thoughts. I started to get paranoid. I couldn't look at my coworkers the same way, knowing the dark, twisted things they were thinking. I tried to tune out the voices, but it was impossible. They were always there, a constant horrifying buzz in the back of my mind. Then one night, I heard something that changed everything. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard a voice whispering in my ear. It was different from the others, clearer, more focused. It said, "I know you're listening." I shot up in bed, heart racing. The room was dark and silent, but I could feel someone watching me. The voice spoke again, closer this time. "You shouldn't have taken the potion. Now you belong to us." Panic set in. I threw off the covers and ran to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror, and that's when I saw it. A shadowy figure standing behind me, its eyes glowing red. I spun around, but the room was empty. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I tried to throw the potion away, but it was gone. I searched everywhere, but there was no trace of the vial. The voices were louder than ever, and the shadowy figure seemed to follow me everywhere I went. I don't know what's happening to me. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I can't trust anyone, not even myself. The voices are driving me insane, and the figure is always there, watching, waiting. I don't know what to do. If anyone has any idea how to stop this, please, I'm begging you, help me. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I stopped going to work. I couldn't face my coworkers, knowing their darkest secrets. I called in sick, but the voices didn't care about my excuses. They followed me everywhere, grocery store, the park, even my own home. I started to hear more than just thoughts. I heard screams, sinister laughter, and whispers promising pain and suffering. The shadowy figure became a constant presence, lurking in the corners of every room. Its red eyes bore into me, and I could feel its malevolent intent. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. It was like trying to ignore a nightmare that wouldn't end. One night, as I lay in bed, the figure stepped out of the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, with skin that looked like it had been stretched too tight over its bones. Its eyes glowed a sickly red, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "You're ours now," it hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You opened the door, and now you can't close it." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure reached out and touched my forehead with one long, bony finger. I felt a searing pain, like my skull was being split open. My vision went black, and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was in my bed, drenched in sweat. The figure was gone, but the pain in my head remained. I stumbled to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't me. My eyes were bloodshot, and my skin was pale and clammy. I looked like a ghost. The voices were louder than ever, a cacophony of madness that drowned out my thoughts. I could hear them plotting, scheming, and I knew they were coming for me. I had to do something, anything to stop them. Desperate, I turned to the dark web forums for help. I posted my story, begging for advice. Most of the responses were mocking or dismissive, but one message stood out. It was from a user named Watcher, who claimed to know how to break the curse. "Meet me in person," the message read. "Midnight at the old warehouse on Elm Street. Come alone." I knew it was a bad idea, but I was out of options. I needed help, and Watcher was my only hope. I drove to the warehouse, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The streets were deserted, and the warehouse loomed like a dark sentinel in the night. I parked the car and approached the building. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The air was cold and damp, and the only light came from a flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Watcher stood in the center of the room, his face hidden by a hood. "You came," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Good. I can help you, but it will cost you." "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Your soul," he replied. I laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke, but Watcher didn't laugh. He stepped closer, and I could see his eyes glinting in the darkness. "I'm serious," he said. "You tampered with forces beyond your understanding. The only way to break the curse is to make a trade. Your soul for your sanity." I was terrified, but I had no choice. The voices were driving me mad, and the figure was always there, watching, waiting. I agreed, and Watcher handed me a vial filled with a thick, black liquid. "Drink this," he said. "It will sever your connection to the other side." I hesitated, but the voices screamed in my head, urging me to do it. I uncorked the vial and swallowed the liquid. It burned like acid, and I collapsed to the floor, convulsing in pain. When I woke up, Watcher was gone. The warehouse was empty, and the voices were silent. For the first time in weeks, my mind was clear. I felt a sense of relief, but it was short-lived. As I stood up, I noticed something strange. My reflection in a broken mirror on the wall was smiling, but I wasn't. The figure was back, its eyes glowing brighter than before. "You've made a grave mistake," it whispered. "Now we are one." I screamed and ran out of the warehouse, but I could feel the figure inside me, lurking in the corners of my mind. The voices were gone, but their presence was replaced by something much worse. I could feel the figure's thoughts, its hunger, its malice. I don't know how long I can hold on. I feel it taking over, piece by piece. If anyone reads this, please don't make the same mistake I did. The dark web is a place of nightmares, and some doors should never be opened. I tried to resume my life after that night, but nothing was the same. The potion had taken something from me, something I couldn't get back. The figure was inside me now, a constant presence in my mind. It whispered to me, feeding on my fear and despair. At first, it was just a background noise, a faint whisper in the dark corners of my thoughts. But as days turned into weeks, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was like having someone else living in my head, someone who hated me and wanted to see me suffer. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure, its glowing red eyes and twisted smile. I started seeing it in my dreams too, and those dreams quickly turned into nightmares. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, the figure's laughter echoing in my ears. I avoided mirrors, but every reflective surface betrayed me. I'd catch glimpses of the figure lurking behind me, watching with those horrible red eyes. It felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I didn't know what was real anymore. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I felt a sudden sharp pain in my head. It was like a hot poker being driven through my skull. I doubled over, clutching my head, and the figure's voice filled my mind louder than ever. "You're mine now," it hissed. "There's no escape." The pain was unbearable. I stumbled to the bathroom, trying to find some relief. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection was smiling back at me, but it wasn't my smile. It was the figure's smile, wide and cruel. I smashed the mirror with my fist, but it didn't help. I could still feel the figure inside me, laughing, enjoying my suffering. The days that followed were a blur of pain and fear. I couldn't go to work, couldn't see my friends. I isolated myself in my apartment, hoping that somehow the figure would leave me alone. But it only got worse. The figure began to take control, forcing me to do things I didn't want to do. I'd find myself standing in the middle of the room, holding a knife, with no memory of how I got there. I'd wake up with cuts and bruises, my hands covered in blood. I was losing time, blacking out for hours, sometimes days. One night, I woke up to find myself in a dark alley, far from my apartment. My clothes were torn, and I was covered in dirt and blood. I had no memory of how I got there, but I knew the figure was responsible. It was taking over, piece by piece. Desperate, I turned back to the dark web. I found another forum, one that dealt with exorcisms and dark rituals. I posted my story again, begging for help. This time, I got a response from someone named the Oracle. "The entity inside you is a parasite," the Oracle wrote. "It feeds on your fear and pain. You must confront it and banish it from your mind. Meet me at the old church on Grove Street, midnight. Come prepared." I didn't have any other options. I had to try. I gathered what little courage I had left and made my way to the church. It was an old, crumbling building, abandoned for years. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, and the smell of mold and decay filled my nostrils. The Oracle was waiting for me inside, a tall figure shrouded in darkness. He wore a long, tattered robe, and his face was hidden beneath a hood. "You've come," he said, his voice echoing in the empty church. "Good. We must act quickly. The parasite is strong, but together we can banish it." He led me to the altar, where a circle of candles had been arranged. He handed me a small, ornate dagger and instructed me to sit in the center of the circle. "This will be painful," he warned, "but it's the only way." I nodded, clutching the dagger tightly. The Oracle began to chant in a language I didn't understand, his voice rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence. The candles flickered, and the air grew thick with the scent of burning herbs. Suddenly, the pain in my head returned, more intense than ever. I screamed, but the Oracle's chanting drowned out my cries. The figure's voice filled my mind, screaming in rage. "You can't get rid of me," it roared. "You belong to me." I felt the figure thrashing inside me, trying to take control, but the Oracle's chanting grew louder, more powerful. The candles flared, and I felt a searing heat spread through my body. "Use the dagger," the Oracle commanded. "Cut it out." With trembling hands, I raised the dagger and plunged it into my arm. The pain was excruciating, but I didn't stop. I kept cutting, trying to drive the figure out. Blood flowed freely, and I felt myself growing weaker. But then, something changed. The figure's screams grew fainter, and I felt it being pulled away, piece by piece. The Oracle's chanting reached a fever pitch, and with one final agonizing scream, The figure was gone. I collapsed to the floor, bleeding and exhausted, but free. The oracle knelt beside me, his face still hidden in shadow. "It's done," he said. "The parasite is gone, but the scars will remain." I looked at my arm, covered in deep, bloody gashes. The pain was intense, but it was nothing compared to the torment I had endured. I had survived, but at a terrible cost. Recovery was slow. I spent weeks in the hospital, my arm bandaged and stitched up. The doctors asked questions, but I couldn't tell them the truth. They chalked it up to a mental breakdown, but I knew better. The figure was gone, but its memory lingered like a shadow, dark and oppressive. When I was finally released, I returned to my apartment. It felt empty, haunted by the remnants of my ordeal. I tried to resume a normal life, but the scars on my arm were a constant reminder of the nightmare I'd lived through. I couldn't forget, and I couldn't escape the lingering sense of dread. I avoided the dark web, terrified of what else might be lurking there. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and I found myself drawn back, needing to understand what had happened to me. I started researching, trying to find answers, hoping to find some way to ensure it could never happen again. One night, as I sat in front of my computer, I received an anonymous message. It was from Watcher. "Congratulations on surviving," it read. "But remember, the dark web is full of secrets. Be careful what you seek." I deleted the message, but it left me uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, that the dark web had its hooks in me. I changed my passwords, tried to secure my computer, but paranoia had already taken root. The nightmares returned, less frequent, but just as vivid. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the figure's laughter echoing in my ears. It was gone, but its presence still lingered in my subconscious. Therapy helped, but only so much. There are some scars that never truly heal. Months passed, and I tried to rebuild my life. I got a new job, moved to a new apartment, and made new friends. But the past was always there, lurking in the background. I was more cautious, more aware of the darkness that could lurk in seemingly innocent places. One day, I received a package. There was no return address, just like before. My heart pounded as I opened it, fearing the worst. Inside was a small glass vial, filled with a dark, viscous liquid. A note was attached. "For when you're ready to know more." I threw the vial away, terrified of what it represented, but the note haunted me. It was a reminder that the dark web was still out there, filled with unimaginable horrors. I had only scratched the surface, and the thought of what else might be hidden there filled me with dread. I tried to move on, but the temptation was always there, a nagging curiosity at the back of my mind. What else could I discover? What other secrets lay hidden in the shadows? I fought the urge to find out, knowing it could only lead to more pain, more suffering. But one night, as I sat alone in my apartment, the voices returned, faint at first, just whispers in the dark. I could hear them calling to me, beckoning me to return to the dark web, to uncover more secrets. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it would only lead to more nightmares, more horror, but the pull was too strong. I logged back on, my hands trembling, and began to search. The dark web was a labyrinth of shadows, and I was drawn deeper and deeper, unable to resist its call. As I delved into the depths, I found more threads, more whispers of the supernatural and the bizarre. I became obsessed, needing to understand, to find out more. The figure was gone, but its memory fueled my curiosity, pushing me to explore further. One night, I found another thread about the potion. Different seller, different name, but the same promise. The ability to read minds. My heart raced as I read the description. The same excitement and fear bubbling up inside me. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't resist. I made the purchase, feeling a sick sense of déjà vu. The package arrived a week later, just like before. A plain brown box, no return address. Inside was a vial, filled with the same dark liquid. I stared at it, my mind a whirlwind of fear and anticipation. I knew what it could do, what it could cost, but the temptation was too strong. I had to know more. I uncorked the vial, the smell of burnt rubber filling the air, and measured out a single drop. As I raised it to my lips, I hesitated, the memories of my ordeal flashing before my eyes. But the voices whispered in my mind, urging me on. I closed my eyes and swallowed the drop. The whispers grew louder, the darkness closing in. I knew I was making a mistake, but it was too late. The potion took hold, and I felt the figure's presence returning, stronger than before. "You never learn," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. "You're ours forever." The last thing I remember was the laughter echoing in my mind as the darkness swallowed me whole. I was lost, consumed by the shadows, a prisoner of the dark web's twisted secrets. If anyone reads this, heed my warning. The dark web is a place of nightmares, and some doors should never be opened. Once you step into the darkness, there's no turning back. You belong to it, forever. I joined a dark web society that claims to control the stock market. I've always been fascinated by the idea of secret societies and the power they supposedly wield. So when I stumbled upon an anonymous forum post hinting at a dark web society that controls the stock market, I couldn't resist digging deeper. It seemed like a joke at first, a conspiracy theory for those wearing tinfoil hats, but something about the post felt real. I can't reveal how I found the entry point, but let's just say it involved a lot of risky clicking and some serious encryption tools. Eventually, I ended up on a shadowy website that made my skin crawl. The homepage was minimalist, just a black background with a blinking cursor waiting for a password. The post had mentioned a phrase, "The wolves of Wall Street feast at midnight." With a deep breath, I typed it in. I was immediately redirected to a forum that looked like something straight out of a hacker movie. Threads with cryptic titles, users with anonymous handles, and the occasional stock ticker update. It didn't take long before I noticed a private message in my inbox from someone named V. The message was short. "Welcome. If you're serious, prove yourself. Do not disappoint." There was a link attached. My curiosity was piqued, and I clicked it without thinking twice. The link took me to a hidden chat room. There were a few other users, all as anonymous as I was, and the conversation was chilling. They were discussing upcoming stock market movements with eerie precision, predicting events days before they happened. These weren't mere speculations. They were stating facts. One of the users, Z, seemed to be the leader. They were orchestrating everything, and their confidence was unsettling. After lurking for a while, I gathered the courage to type. "How do I join?" Z's response came almost immediately. "Complete the initiation." They sent another link, this one leading to a live video feed. I clicked it, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A man was tied to a chair in a dimly lit room, blindfolded and gagged. The camera was shaky, as if held by someone in a hurry. The chat room fell silent. everyone waiting for my reaction. "Prove you're one of us," Z typed. "Direct the action." I hesitated. This was beyond anything I had ever imagined, but my curiosity got the better of me. "What do I need to do?" I typed back. "Decide his fate," Z replied. "Tell us what to do with him." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. This was insane. I should have closed my laptop and walked away, but something dark within me wanted to see how far this would go. I typed the first thing that came to mind. "Make him confess," I wrote. "Find out who he is." The person behind the camera moved closer to the bound man. They ripped off the gag and the man started screaming. He was incoherent, begging for mercy, promising he didn't know anything. I watched in horror as they started asking him questions, demanding to know who he was working for. The man kept pleading, his cries echoing in my headphones. The other users in the chat began to type suggestions, each more twisted than the last. One of them suggested breaking his fingers to get him to talk. Another wanted to waterboard him. I couldn't believe what I was reading. These people were serious. They were enjoying this. "Do it," I typed, almost reflexively. "Break a finger." I didn't think they would actually do it, but they did. The man's scream was blood-curdling. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. This was real. This was happening because of me. "Enough," Z finally typed. "Welcome to the society." I felt sick to my stomach, but I was in too deep to back out now. They gave me access to the rest of the forum, and what I found there was even more disturbing. Detailed plans for manipulating stock prices, discussions about high-profile targets, and the occasional mention of cleaning up loose ends. I started to realize the extent of their power. These weren't just traders with insider knowledge. These were people who would do anything to maintain their control. And now, I was one of them. Over the next few weeks, I learned the rules. I was given small tasks to prove my loyalty, leaking sensitive information, manipulating online discussions, even sabotaging a rival's career. Each task pushed me further down the rabbit hole, and each time I completed one, I felt a twisted sense of accomplishment. But the real horror began when I received another private message from Z. This time, there was no link, just a simple instruction. Watch the news tonight. That evening, I tuned into the local news channel. The lead story was about a high-profile financial analyst who had been found dead in his home. The police were calling it a suicide, but I knew better. The chat room exploded with messages, all of them congratulating each other on a job well done. I was horrified, but I couldn't deny the thrill I felt. As the weeks turned into months, I became more and more entangled in their web. I started losing sleep, haunted by the things I had seen and done. The society's influence was everywhere, and I began to fear for my own safety. If they could take out someone as powerful as that analyst, what chance did I have if I tried to leave? But the final straw came when they asked me to prove my loyalty once more. This time, the target was someone I knew, an old friend who worked for a tech company. They wanted me to sabotage his work, to ruin his career. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't. I typed out my refusal, my heart pounding. The chat room went silent for a moment, and then Z's response appeared. "You know too much. There's no way out." Panic set in. I shut down my computer and tried to think. I needed to get out, to disappear. But even as I packed a bag and prepared to run, I knew it was too late. They were watching. They were always watching. And now, as I write this, I can hear footsteps outside my door. This is my confession, my warning. Stay away from the dark web. Stay away from the societies that promise power and wealth. Because once you're in, there's no way out. If you don't hear from me again, you'll know why. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside my window sent me into a state of high alert. I was convinced that at any moment, someone would burst through my door and drag me away. But dawn came, and I was still alone. My mind was racing. I needed a plan, but where could I go? What could I do? The society had resources far beyond my comprehension, and I had seen firsthand what happened to those who crossed them. I decided to go underground. I used the few hacking skills I had picked up to wipe my digital footprint as best as I could. I withdrew all my money in cash, ditched my phone, and took a train to a city where no one knew me. It wasn't much, but it was all I could think to do on such short notice. For the first few days, I barely left the dingy motel room I had checked into. Paranoia was eating me alive. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, convinced that every stranger was a member of the society, sent to find me. I even started to see the shadows moving in the corners of my vision, though I couldn't tell if it was real or just my mind playing tricks on me. I kept the TV on for background noise, trying to drown out the silence. That was when I saw it, a news report about my friend from the tech company. He had been found dead in his apartment, an apparent victim of a break-in gone wrong. They said he had been tortured before he was killed. I felt my stomach churn. This was my fault. If I'd just done what they asked, maybe he would still be alive. But there was no going back now. I had to keep moving, stay ahead of them. The next target would be me. In a desperate attempt to find a way out, I returned to the dark web. I needed information, something that could help me understand who these people were and how I could escape their grasp. It was a dangerous gamble, but I had no other choice. I found an old contact, someone who had been a part of the hacker community for years. We arranged a meeting in a rundown internet cafe. He was a jittery guy, constantly looking around like he was expecting to be ambushed at any moment. When I told him my story, he just shook his head. "Man, you really stepped in it this time," he said, taking a nervous sip of his coffee. "These people, they're not just some internet trolls. They're serious. They have connections everywhere. I've heard rumors about them for years. They call themselves the Wolves." I asked him if he knew a way out, any way to disappear for good. He looked at me with pity in his eyes. "There's only one way to get off their radar," he said. "You have to give them something bigger, something that makes them forget about you." That night, I hacked back into the society's forum, looking for anything that could be used as leverage. I spent hours sifting through messages, trying to find a weak spot. Finally, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. There was a thread discussing a major event planned for the following week, a coordinated attack on several financial institutions designed to crash the stock market and cause global chaos. They were calling it the Great Purge. This was it. This was my chance. If I could leak this information to the authorities, maybe, just maybe, I could trade it for my safety. I gathered all the evidence I could find, screenshots, chat logs, everything. Then I contacted a journalist I had met years ago during a tech conference. He was skeptical at first, but once he saw what I had, he agreed to meet. We arranged to meet in a public park, figuring it would be safer that way. I arrived early, my heart pounding in my chest. When he finally showed up, I handed him a USB drive with all the evidence. "Get this to the authorities," I said. "They need to know what's coming." He nodded, slipping the drive into his pocket. "I'll do what I can," he said. "But you need to be careful. These people don't mess around." I thanked him and left, hoping that I had done enough. For the next few days, I stayed glued to the news, waiting for some sign that the information had reached the right people. Then one morning, I saw it. A series of arrests had been made, disrupting what was described as a major financial terror plot. I felt a momentary sense of relief, but it was short-lived. That night, I received another message from Z. It was just a single line. "We know what you did." Panic set in once more. I had to keep running, but where could I go that they wouldn't find me? I packed my things and left the motel, trying to think of my next move. I needed to disappear completely, but I didn't know how. As I walked through the dark streets, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, but there was no one there. I kept walking, picking up my pace. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and I broke into a run. I didn't see the car until it was too late. It screeched to a halt beside me, and two men in dark suits stepped out. They grabbed me, dragging me into the back seat before I could scream. I fought, but it was no use. They were too strong. They blindfolded me and drove for what felt like hours. When the car finally stopped, they hauled me out and threw me into a cold, damp room. The blindfold was removed, and I found myself face to face with Z. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome back," he said. "We have a lot to talk about." I knew then that there was no escape. The wolves had me in their grip, and they weren't letting go. The room was bare, concrete walls stained with mildew and years of neglect. A single flickering light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I was tied to a metal chair, my wrists bound with zip ties that cut into my skin. Z stood in front of me, his expression a mix of amusement and irritation. "You really thought you could outsmart us?" he asked, his voice calm and measured. "You thought you could betray the society and walk away?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to find a way out, but there was none. I was trapped. Z sighed, shaking his head. "We have rules for a reason," he said. "You broke them. Now you have to face the consequences." He nodded to one of the men who had brought me here. The man stepped forward, carrying a metal briefcase. He set it on a table and opened it, revealing a collection of instruments that made my blood run cold. Pliers, scalpels, needles, and other devices I couldn't even name. "We're going to have a little chat," Z said, picking up a scalpel and inspecting it. "I want to know everything you've done since you left, every person you've talked to, every place you've been. And if you lie, well," he trailed off, but the implication was clear. They started with the questions, each one more invasive than the last. Where had I been? Who had I spoken to? What had I done? I tried to hold out, but the pain was unbearable. Every lie was met with a new form of torture, each one more inventive and sadistic than the last. They broke my fingers, one by one. They cut deep gashes into my arms and legs, letting the blood flow freely. They used the needles to puncture my skin, finding places that hurt in ways I didn't know were possible. All the while, Z watched, his eyes cold and calculating. I lost track of time. Hours, days. Who knew how long I was there? The pain became a constant, a background noise, that I couldn't escape. I told them everything, every detail I could remember, hoping it would be enough to make them stop. But it wasn't. They wanted more. They wanted to know about the journalist, about anyone else who might know their secrets. I tried to protect him, but they saw through my lies. They found his name in my phone records, and I knew then that he was as good as dead. Finally, when they had extracted every piece of information I had, Z stepped forward. "You've caused us a lot of trouble," he said. "We can't have that, but killing you would be too easy. We need to make an example out of you." He motioned to the two men, and they untied me from the chair. I was too weak to fight back, too broken to resist. They dragged me out of the room and down a long, dark corridor. The walls were lined with doors, each one closed tight. I could hear muffled screams coming from behind some of them, a chilling reminder of what awaited those who crossed the society. We stopped in front of a door at the end of the corridor. Z opened it, revealing a small windowless room with a single bed. They threw me inside and locked the door behind me. I was alone, but not for long. The door opened again, and a figure stepped inside. It was a woman, dressed in black, her face hidden behind a mask. She carried a tray with a syringe and a small vial of clear liquid. Without a word, she approached me and injected the liquid into my arm. At first, nothing happened. Then a wave of numbness washed over me, and I felt my body go limp. My vision blurred, and I struggled to stay conscious. The woman watched, her eyes cold and unfeeling. As the drug took effect, I felt myself slipping away. My mind began to drift, memories flashing before my eyes. I saw my friend, the journalist, the things I had done to prove my loyalty to the society. And then, darkness. When I woke up, I was back in the room with the concrete walls. My body ached, every nerve on fire. Z was there, waiting. "Welcome back," he said. "We've decided to give you another chance. Consider it a gift." He leaned in close, his breath hot on my face. "But remember this. You belong to us now. You do what we say when we say it. If you even think about betraying us again, we'll make you wish you were dead." With that, he stood up and left, leaving me alone in the darkness. I knew then that there was no escape. The society had its claws in me, and they weren't letting go. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. They kept me alive, but barely. I was their puppet, forced to do their bidding. I hacked into systems, leaked information, ruined lives, all to stay alive. But the worst part was knowing that there was no end in sight. They owned me, body and soul, and as long as they had control, I would never be free. The darkness that had taken root in my soul grew deeper with each passing day. I had become a monster, a tool of destruction, and there was no turning back. But even in the depths of my despair, a small part of me clung to the hope that one day I might find a way to break free, to escape the society's grasp and reclaim my life. For now, though, all I could do was survive. Surviving had become my only goal. Every day, I walked a tightrope, balancing my obedience to the society with the remnants of my shattered conscience. The room with the concrete walls became my prison and my sanctuary, a place where I was both controlled and allowed to exist. The torture stopped, but the psychological torment never did. They broke me down until I was a hollow shell, doing their bidding without question. One day, Z called me into a different room, a darkened office with multiple computer screens displaying live feeds from around the world. He sat behind a massive desk, a cigar in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other. He motioned for me to sit. "We have a new task for you," he said, his voice dripping with authority. "A big one. Fail. And you know what happens." I nodded, my throat dry. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were details of a high-profile target, an influential politician who had been speaking out against corporate corruption. The society wanted him silenced, and they wanted it done discreetly. "This needs to look like an accident," Z continued. "No loose ends." I took the folder and left, my mind racing. This was different. This wasn't just hacking or leaking information. This was a hit job. I had never killed anyone before, but I knew refusing wasn't an option. They would kill me without a second thought. I spent the next few days planning. The politician was scheduled to attend a charity event at a high-rise hotel. Security would be tight, but I had access to resources most could only dream of. I hacked into the hotel's security system, studying every camera angle, every guard's routine. The night of the event, I put my plan into action. Disguised as a maintenance worker, I slipped into the hotel unnoticed. I made my way to the 23rd floor, where the politician's suite was located. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the door. Using the skills I had honed under the society's tutelage, I bypassed the lock and entered the suite. The politician was alone, sitting at a desk, reviewing some documents. He didn't hear me approach until it was too late. I placed a chloroform-soaked rag over his mouth, holding it there until he went limp. I dragged him to the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. The next part of the plan was supposed to be simple, make it look like a tragic fall. But as I lifted him over the railing, something inside me snapped. This was a human being. Innocent or not, he didn't deserve to die like this. In that moment, I decided I couldn't go through with it. I pulled him back from the edge and laid him on the floor, hoping he'd stay unconscious long enough for me to make my escape. I fled the hotel, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I knew the society would find out. They always did. But I couldn't bring myself to be a murderer. I returned to my hideout, knowing the consequences would be dire. My phone buzzed. A message from Z. "Meet me. Now." I had no choice. I went to the designated location, a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Z was waiting, flanked by his usual goons. He looked at me with a mix of disappointment and rage. "You failed," he said, his voice icy. "You know what that means." I braced myself for the inevitable, but what happened next surprised me. Z stepped forward and punched me in the stomach, sending me to my knees. He grabbed my hair and yanked my head back, forcing me to look at him. "You're worthless," he spat. "But I'm giving you one last chance. Complete the job, or you're dead." He released me, and I crumpled to the ground. The goons dragged me out of the warehouse and threw me into the back of a van. As we drove, I realized they were taking me to the politician's home. I had to finish the job, or they would kill us both. We arrived at the politician's mansion. They shoved me out of the van, and I stumbled up the steps to the front door. I had no plan, no idea how I was going to do this without getting caught. But I knew I couldn't fail again. I slipped inside, the house eerily quiet. I found the politician in his study, his back to me. He was on the phone, his voice tense. I crept closer, my hands shaking. Suddenly, he turned and saw me. His eyes widened in recognition, and he reached for a gun on his desk. I lunged, tackling him to the ground. We struggled, the gun skidding across the floor. In the chaos, I managed to grab it and point it at him. "Please," he gasped. You don't have to do this. I hesitated, the weight of the decision crushing me. But then I heard footsteps behind me, the society's goons, coming to make sure I followed through. I had no choice. I pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening. The politician's body went limp, his blood pooling on the floor. I dropped the gun, feeling numb. The goons grabbed me, dragging me back to the van. Good job, one of them said, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Z will be pleased. They dumped me back at the warehouse, and I was left alone to process what I had done. I had crossed a line, one I could never uncross. The society had broken me completely, turning me into a killer. Days turned into weeks, and the guilt gnawed at me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the politician's face, heard his last plea for mercy. One night, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this. I had to find a way out, even if it meant my death. I gathered what little courage I had left and began to plan my escape. I hacked into the society's systems one last time, gathering as much information as I could. I created a digital trail, leading them to believe I was planning another betrayal. I knew they would come for me, but I was ready. When the goons arrived, I was waiting. I had rigged the hideout with explosives, a dead man's switch in my hand. As they burst through the door, I smiled. See you in hell, I said, releasing the switch. The explosion rocked the building, flames engulfing everything. I felt the heat, the pain, but also a sense of freedom. In my final moments, I was free from their control. This is my confession, my final warning. The society is real, and they are always watching. They will find you, control you, destroy you. If you value your life, stay away from the dark web. Stay away from the wolves of Wall Street. Because once you're in, there's no way out.